Good morning, everyone. I can see that some people are still trickling into the webinar this morning, but I thought I'd get started with some of the housekeeping and logistics before handing over to Matt and David, who are going to be leading today's webinar. So welcome, everyone, to our webinar on NFV, Keeping NFV on Track. My name is Amy Cameron. I'll be moderating this webinar. And with me today, we have David Martin. He's an Associate Senior Analyst with STL Partners, and he's been leading our research on NFV. And we also have Matt Pooley, who's a consultant on our consulting team, and he's done lots of work as well on NFV strategies. So a couple of bits of housekeeping. We're going to probably do a discussion between Matt and David for 25 to 30 minutes, and then afterwards we'll open up to a question and answer period. So anyone who has any questions, please feel free to submit them throughout the webinar. You can do so on the little questions tab on your toolbar, and we'll get to them during the question and answer period. If we don't have time to answer you during the webinar today, then we'll try and get back to you in writing afterwards. All right, so without any further ado, I will hand over to Matt and David.
Good morning, everybody. This is David on the line. NFV, a little quote from our deployment tracker service. It's like a sat-nav where the road network itself is in constant flux and the coordinates for the end destination are constantly changing. I think that's the kind of description that quite a lot of people will relate to. The parameters of NFV deployment are still being debated and changing as work on the standards is proceeding. So what we're not going to be doing in this webinar is providing a primer into STL and NFV technologies. We're assuming that our well-educated audience knows all about STL and NFV, but just basic definition, potted definition there to if anybody needs to refer to it or wishes to refer to it. So, more importantly, why does NFV and SDN matter? Well, we believe that NFV is a crucial technological innovation that has the potential to deliver a sea change in scalability, performance, and agility for communications networks. And we see it as a fundamental enabler for other emerging technologies that everybody urges operators to start working on and developing. So the Internet of Things, AI, 5G, multi-access edge computing, etc. We believe that telcos will not really succeed in any of those areas unless they implement some form of SDN and NFV, because it's a really essential technology for enabling the networks to scale to process the capacity requirements for those other services and to deliver the compute power that is going to be necessary. So one way of putting it is that SDN and NFV is for the network what the evolution from hardware to software was for the computer. It's possibly as important as that. It's that sort of sea change or step change, and the network of the future will need to operate and flex at software speeds. So our credentials at STL Partners, we've done a lot of work in the area of NFV and SDN. So on the one hand, there is a wide portfolio of reports, analytical reports, over 12 executive briefing reports and more in the pipeline. More on that later. And then there is our recently launched NFV Deployment Tracker service, which is an ongoing service, which I'm going to talk about, which is tracking what's already happening. So the first part of it is what should happen, what's already happening, and then we have also had a number of consulting engagements in the area, which really are about answering the question, well, how do we get there? So first of all, I just wanted to talk about our service, the NFV Deployment Tracker, which was launched in September. It's a quarterly updated service, and it's tracking verified live commercial deployments of NFV and SDN. So it's not going into the vast number of proofs of concepts, lab tests, live pilots, and so on. It's looking at what we know has actually been launched as a commercial service on the basis of NFV and SDN. And the data for the tracker is taken from operators direct and vendors and from reliable industry media. It's mostly public domain information, but it does include a certain amount of information that we have sourced direct from our conversations with operators. So that's more confidential information that we add to an aggregate data set that informs the overall analysis of the market. And the purpose of the service is to basically build into the most comprehensive, reliable source of market intelligence on NFV and SDN in live telco networks. So the data in the tracker is provided in two main forms. There's basically an Excel database that charts deployments listed by operator, date of deployment, which we count as the date when the live services were launched based on the technology, the region and country in which the deployments take place, the vendors involved, and the types of NFV and SDN technology involved. There's also an aggregate data set, as I said, which from which we draw charts and analysis. There are quarterly releases, so later this month we'll be adding the North American data set and also updating the Europe data set, which formed the basis of the September release. And then from March, we will be extending the coverage worldwide. And in addition to the actual quantitative data, each update contains an analytical report discussing trends that we've observed in the context of the latest industry developments and deployments. So just a couple of brief highlights here. This is from the Europe update from September. Data includes 59 completed and planned deployments by 21 operators. Now, just a brief footnote, by a deployment, we consider every component that is involved in the deployment supporting a live service. And that could actually also be multi-country deployments if it's the same VNF and services that are being supported across multi-country operations. So, for example, 23 European markets are covered in the deployments, but that includes 24 pan-European or global deployments by Europe-based operators. But many more actual VNFs are involved in those deployments. So whereas there's 59 actual deployments, there are 130 virtual network functions, functional subcomponents, and supporting infrastructure elements that we've tracked. An overall trend that we observed in the update is that there has been less growth in 2017 than some people expected. 2016 saw a big growth, 70%, but there hasn't been an exponential increase in 2017. And the bottom chart shows you briefly some of the types of deployment that dominate, but we're going to return to that. So just waiting for the North America. All right, yes. So we have North America, similar breakdown of the key data points. We have tracked 66 deployments, so a little bit more than Europe, but fewer operators involved, only 16. That includes 11 US players, 3 Canadian and 1 Caribbean. And 119 individual virtual network functions or subcomponents or infrastructure elements. On the chart, you see that there was a big growth in 2015, which was generated by the ambitious rollouts of AT&T and Verizon in that period, and another surge this year, which reflects other players catching up, and in fact a more generalized deployment of managed SD-WAN services by operators. Apologies for the delay, I'm just getting the next slide up.
Great. So it's Matt speaking now. I think what I wanted to speak about next was a little bit about some of the why and the thinking behind, perhaps, the point David just made about how NFV SDN uptake has been happening, but perhaps not as quickly as many have predicted or have been expecting. And we've spoken to a lot of operators about this and about specifically how they see themselves approaching NFV SDN, what path they see themselves taking towards adopting virtualization and to launching these services. And I think possibly part of the reason things are happening more slowly than expected is because a lot of operators are still trying to figure this out. It's still a big question. But we have had a lot of conversations, primarily based on a big interview program we ran last year, but also on some of the consulting engagements that have happened since. And we have started to see some trends among those who are moving forward in how they think about NFV SDN operation. And we kind of see that there are three different ways that people are thinking about this and how this can affect their business. So the first of those is what we call technology evolution. And this is something that we've seen adopted by the likes of Vodafone or SFR in France. And this is a sort of technology first approach. This is a focus on scaled virtualization of a few of your core functions or subsystems, and it's aimed at kind of launching quickly, but minimizing risk, dependency, organizational change. This typically comes from a kind of technology team point of view. On the other hand, kind of the other end of the scale are operators like Verizon or NTT in Japan, who are looking at this from a kind of service first approach. So we've called this service-led innovation. This is about focusing more on the customer and the services themselves that that NFV and SDN will enable, as opposed to thinking of it purely as a technological change, as an upgrade to your network. The third, which is kind of a hybrid of the two and more, is what we've called organizational transformation. And there are some typically bigger telcos out there, typically some of the bigger groups, AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, the two examples we have here, who are seeing virtualization as just one piece in their wider organizational transformation away from the perhaps traditional telco voice and data towards more of a sort of software provider, and David will speak a little bit more about that in a moment. But in this case, NFV SDN is a catalyst for that change, both from a technological point of view, enabling this big shift, but also culturally as well. So if you look at this in terms of the trends we've seen in the tracker and the reports that David has got in the pipeline, I think this is an interesting way of looking at things. I think David's just going to walk you through it.
Yeah, so they see some additional terms applied to each of the pathways that we've described, and these are taken from, shameless plug here, a report in the pipeline that's looking at NFV deployment strategies. Basically, we see the technology evolution approach, which you see defined there, as being essentially about delivering the software-enabled network. So it's utilizing software to greatly improve the efficiency and the cost basis for delivering scaled connectivity services that are going to be necessary to support the digital economy and digital service provision. So that's software-enabled network, whereas the service-led innovation approach we see as being around network as a software service. So it's really kind of thinking about the cloud as both the production environment, the delivery environment, and the environment in which connectivity services are consumed, very much the cloud model. And finally, the organizational transformation approach, which Matt's been describing as being much more about a holistic evolution towards a software-centric operations and service portfolio, is really ultimately about arriving at a situation of a telco being a provider of software as a networked service. So really software, in a sense, becomes the essence and the basis for the services themselves. but the added value that telcos can provide, and the business opportunity for telcos really is in being able to leverage their connectivity assets and skills to combine the two and as an integrated offering, digital service offering and platform.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out at this point actually that these three different pathways are not necessarily mutually exclusive, if you like. They're not necessarily the end goal. These are more, we've looked at these more in terms of the starting point, so where telcos are going first in terms of their NFV SDN adoption. In reality, I think that many organizations will maybe shift from one to another, or start with one and start to adopt aspects of another. Many of the operators we've spoken to have said, okay, we're looking at this technology first, the technology team is driving it, or product managers at the product management side of things are driving this forward, so we're looking at this from a service-led point of view. But actually, ultimately, this will lead us towards number three, to this idea of being a software provider. You know, a big organizational transformation, but we're starting small and building up. I think that's up for debate. I think which way forward is the best way forward is something that many people have very different opinions on. But I think these are things that these pathways are linked together, and I think they cross and share many common challenges. What I wanted to do next was just put some of this in the context of the NFV Deployment Tracker, some of the work David's been doing, what we're actually seeing out in the field. So just beginning with technology evolution. What we're seeing here with people that are thinking this from technology first point of view is primarily virtualization of the core network functions, things like your EPC, your IMS, the SBC. I think particularly in Europe, I think EPC was towards the top of the list. You probably couldn't see the little chart we had up earlier, but we will share the slides after for those that are interested. But that was the top one in Europe alongside SDN. In fact, most NFV deployments in Europe to date sort of fit within this technology evolution bracket. It's a virtualization of core network functions first. There is a growing volume of SDN and SD-WAN in Europe, but I think to date, what we've been seeing in the tracker is that most deployments have been in this bucket. From a service-led innovation point of view, what we're seeing really here is an evolution of enterprise managed services that already exist to a kind of a new, better format that better addresses hybrid networking needs and better addresses the shifting needs of enterprises worldwide. And this in North America has led to a big, North America in particular has led to a big emphasis on software-defined networking and SD-WAN in particular. So it's all about enabling the software control of data flows across your WAN, across public internet and the cloud. And I think SD-WAN is possibly the hot topic, if you like, of NFV SDN at the moment, particularly in North America. Organizational transformation has been a lot more, as we said, associated with the more transformational impacts of SDN and NFV on the telco network. It's all about, as we said, moving towards the vision of the future telco, operating these software-based networks, delivering software-based, what you might call, perhaps skeptically, but you might call digital services. What we've seen mostly here is that it's bigger, as I mentioned before, the bigger operator groups, the likes of Deutsche Telekom, AT&T, that have the resources to make that change going forward. But we have spoken as well to some relatively small, what you might call challenger players in some markets who perhaps because they don't have the more established traditional business, if you like, have more opportunity to make a fast pivot, change direction quickly, who are also looking at this as a way forward, going forward. The problem with it is that any of these approaches, whichever approach you take, comes with a whole load of challenges. So, I mean, things have changed over the last 12 months, but particularly when we started talking to operators about this about 12 months ago, many operators said they knew that NFV had many benefits, but they were very, very unconvinced because all they could see were barriers and obstacles in their way. They're saying, well, what about this? What about skill set? What's the business case? You know, how do we take this forward? And we've done a lot of thinking about how you navigate that. what we've done first here is just to help you think about which one of these pathways is the best way forward for a particular business. Is we've pulled out the most common challenges that those undertaking that pathway have come across when we've spoken to them. So with technology evolution, so remembering that this is about virtualizing a few of your core functions, minimizing risk dependencies and all change. The problem, one of the key problems here that people have found is that the business case is unclear. We're still using traditional KPIs, and NFV, SDN, and these new techs don't really fit within that. There's also a risk if this is driven by a technology team of what you might call silos. So technology team driving this forward in isolation from the people that are going to launch services on top of this, and there being lack of communication there. The other big problem, I think, that all telcos are facing, and across all of these pathways as well, is maintaining the technical skill set to do that and getting people on board. Service-led innovation. It may be very easy to convince yourselves internally, perhaps, on the benefits of all of this, but then there's a big problem of developing a compelling proposition for DNF-based services to actually take to the customer themselves, and we've done a lot of work helping people figure that out. There's also the headache of maintaining the operational skill set, and also if you're thinking about functions from a service-led point of view, just making sure that you are doing the necessary to orchestrate and manage them and make sure everything ties together on the back end. Organizational transformation, as you would expect, there's a whole lot of challenges. This is about changing mindsets, building common understanding across large organizations, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done there to drive that forward. It's not impossible, and we've seen some success there, but it takes a lot of coordination. That's a big challenge to overcome. There's also the need generally to build software skills there. Now, these are not the only challenges, and there are a lot of challenges as well that are shared between the different pathways. So what we've been doing a lot of thinking about recently is how on earth you should stay on track. And we see there being three main stages to it. First is about defining your strategic pathway. So, you know, are you going to start with one of these three approaches or something similar to those, a hybrid of those? What's your initial strategy? Where are you aiming? What in the long term, what's your end goal? What's your ambition here? Is it about you know, protecting declining revenues, or is it about completely shifting what your business is and moving forward to something else? The second step's around overcoming challenges, and we've done a lot of work here around what you might call building the playbook. So we've gone out and collated a lot of examples of either in-field or potential ways you could overcome the many different technological challenges, strategic challenges, cultural, operational, etc. that NFV and SDN throw up. And we've got a lot of a big bank of material building to help people overcome that. And the third area where we're helping a lot of operators think about this is actually taking it to the launch stage. So developing your value proposition, developing your marketing communications, how you communicate this to your customer, how you take it to market. One big aspect of that we think is really important, which others aren't perhaps emphasizing so much, is the need to work with your customers on this, what we call the reference customer. So we've been working with a lot of organizations to help them understand potential partners who they could build this forward, run proofs of concept, and help communicate this to the market with. Over those three different steps, I think we find that operators it helps operators to get a better handle on where they're going with all of this. But granted, there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot to overcome, and there's still a lot of thinking to do. I think at this stage, what we wanted to do actually was just try and understand where those people that are attending feel their organisation is at the moment. So what we want to do is run a little vote. So what we'd like to understand is what approach you think your organisation is adopting, which pathway is your organisation adopting, or how is your organisation thinking about NFV-SDN? Is it that technology first point of view, the service-led point of view? Is it part of a wider organisational transformation, or is it something else entirely, or you're not really sure? So what we'll be doing now, you should have appearing on your screen some little radio buttons. it'd be really, really interesting from our point of view if you could choose the one you think is most relevant to you, and hopefully in a moment's time, maybe we'll be able to make the results pop up for all to see. So we'll just give you a moment. We can see some votes coming in. Great, okay. Let's see what the results are. So here we go. We can see, as you might expect, there's a big mix. Almost, yeah, it's almost even between the three, and that's actually when we've been talking to operators, the interviews we've been running, the projects we've been running, we've seen this. There is no one consensus, or no one way that most operators thinking about this. There really is a mix, and that's interesting, I think, as well, because the people that are helping support all of this, you know, the technology vendors, etc., they need to be able to support operators that are thinking about this in very different ways, and that is a big challenge. What we then wanted to do was move on to another vote which is slightly different, but similar, which is more about where do you think you should be going forward. So we know what approach people are adopting now, but we're interested to see whether you think that is the end goal. Is that really the best way for us from your point of view? So this vote is, where do you think what's your ambition, if you like? Is it purely a technology play for you? Is this about services, or do you see your organization moving towards that, making that transformation towards a more software-based player, as David was talking about earlier? So second vote should be on your screen.
I'll just jump in and apologize that I forgot to add the not sure choice. So we are forcing you guys to make a choice.
But it should be interesting, I think. Nice to take a stance. So we'll just give you a moment to make that vote. Okay, great. So results should be popping up. Yeah, as you might expect, I think, as I hinted at earlier, most people seem to be thinking, the majority of people seem to be thinking about this as technology or services being a kind of stepping stone towards a wider transformation. Although perhaps some a little less bullish, I think, if you like, see maybe, okay, let's get the technology underway and then we can start launching some services on top. But,
so I think this is a good time to jump in with a question that I've had from a couple of people, and I think this sort of touches on the poll.
Sure.
The question is, you know, is NFV really a necessity? You know, should operators really be doing it? They're having some challenges deploying it, and as you have said yourself, and we've had questions from the audience, you know, there's not necessarily a clear business case. You know, does it drive revenues, or is it easier to launch services? So maybe you guys can just weigh in a little bit on, is this a necessity? Do operators really have to do it? And if they don't do it, what's the alternative?
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. Obviously, with my sort of hat as the NFV guy, on yes, obviously, I would see it as essential. I mean, essential for what? I mean, obviously, there are different objectives that NFV and SDN deployment will fulfill, which we've been talking about in terms of technology, services, and so on, and transformation. I mean, I think purely from a point of view of being able to scale the network to deal with the capacity issues that it's going to be facing, well, it's already facing from the exponential growth in data volumes, but even more so will be facing when a lot of the new services around IoT, 5G, AR, and so on come online. The present hardware-based network just simply isn't going to be able to scale to deliver the capacity returns. So from the technology evolution point of view, it is all about being able to scale capacity cost efficiently, and you know, doing that through software is a much more flexible, cost efficient way to do that. I would just sort of throw out an example that we refer to the company SFR, for instance. We categorize them as a technology evolution player, and they have sort of delivered a massive increase in their mobile data capacity processing, up to about 100 gigabits per second on a virtualized data plane as part of the evolved packet core. And that's the kind of gains, quantitative leap, if you like, that NFV really ought to be delivering. I mean, it's another level, of course, then it is also about evolving the service portfolio, and it is about creating a platform that is going to enable much more agile service creation and enable operators to capitalize on the opportunities from software-based services. So you can see it as a play around dealing with the existing capacity issues, growing capacity but decreasing margins, being able to deliver much greater capacity much more cost efficiently. But you can see it also as a forward sort of play about service innovation and about being able to really act in an agile way to deliver new services. So I think both sides, and that's the plus side, you know, additional revenue. So I think on both sides of the equation, I do see it as an essential sort of technology set.
There is another aspect, which is perhaps more cynical aspect, in saying that it's probably an inevitable thing as well. You know, it's the way that the industry is going. It's the way that the technology vendors are looking at things. NFV and STN is the way that things are going to work going forwards. And as David said earlier, new technologies are being designed with the assumption that there's going to be virtualized platforms to support it. So from a cynical point of view, you don't really have the choice. Now, there is a choice of how much and how you do it, but I don't think there's really an option of whether you do it.
Yeah, I mean, in essence, the vendor ecosystem, I think, is just not going to be there to support legacy type hardware centric operations. It's all moving to software now. So I think in a sense, you know, there's no going back.
So building on from that, what's the first mover advantage? Is there a massive first mover advantage for the first operators that get there? And then sort of a little bit following on from that, you guys say that, you know, you expect this will be the norm in the industry and this will be the way the industry has to work if it wants to survive. When do you think that sort of tipping point will occur that, you know, SDN is the norm of the way telecoms operators are functioning rather than legacy systems?
Well, if I can sort of jump in first here, I think there's probably a number of questions wrapped up in that. I mean, in terms of first mover advantage, in a sense, the first movers have already started, of course. I mean, everybody's very familiar with sort of the likes of AT&T. Telefonica, of course, sort of initially was the European sort of counterpart to that. But I think some of the first movers that have already developed services, you know, for about 2 or 3 years now, really are starting to reap the benefits from that. So, you know, AT&T is now reporting that its virtualized product set is net revenue positive, so it's actually providing incremental revenue. So a huge investment, but that's now actually delivering returns. And I think the primary advantage really is in innovating new services once you get on board with the technology. This is what Matt was saying, and you develop that sort of platform. It then does provide a springboard for sort of innovative services, which you know, obviously they have to be aligned with market demand, but it puts you in a position to actually deliver those services. So going forward, I think that's in a sense really all about differentiation. It's being able to have that agility within your network that you can differentiate your services, you can mix and match, you can develop new combinations of connectivity and digital services. It really does put you in a much stronger position to innovate.
Yeah, so following on from that as well, are there any ideas yet of, you know, what those new services are? Are there any that have arrived to market yet, or?
Well, I mean, what we've seen, if we think about this in terms of, you know, enterprise managed services in particular, what we've really seen so far is that people are thinking about this in terms of evolving what's already there, so evolving existing managed services. I think one of the potential problems that many operators will see in the way they're thinking about things at the moment is that the services that they're looking to launch are services where there is competition out there from non-telco. One example might be security services, firewalls, for example. There are a lot of cloud players out there that are also offering the same thing. It's really important to find a way to differentiate. And it's going to be very important to leverage the network, as David was talking earlier. This is about software being enabled by the network, but it's also, I think, going to be very important to innovate quickly, try a lot of new things, and really leverage this platform to launch stuff that isn't out there already as quick as possible. I don't know if, David, you had something to add.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the sort of new services, of course, are out there and already proving very successful. So, I mean, obviously, SD-WAN is a clear case of a form of SDN and NFV that is already delivering strong commercial returns, and as Matt was saying, that it enhances the competitive position of operators vis-a-vis the OTT and cloud players, because it's providing a way for operators to leverage their existing network assets, the MPLS, the broadband, to deliver a much more flexible offering in terms of data management of data flows across the WAN and also going over into the cloud. So it really is a very strong answer on the part of telcos to the cloud providers and the OTT providers. And there will obviously be other innovations on their way. I mean, we sort of see NFV SDN as an absolutely essential enabler of a lot of the new services that are coming down the line in 2 to 3 years or even less. So the 5G services, the network slicing, IoT, all of that is going to be generating a huge volume of data. You're going to need that data processing capability near to the users. You're going to need a lot more compute power available on tap. All of this is just an essential enabler of those services. So we tend to think perhaps of telco services obviously as being primarily about connectivity and communications, which of course they still will be, but the way in which the network is going to change as a result of NFV is going to perhaps loosen the distinctions between connectivity and software, because it's all going to be about software, and telcos have to be in that sort of play, and they have to be leveraging what they've got in terms of the network to then put themselves in a strong position to innovate some of these new services based on those technologies that I've just referred to.
I suppose the succinct way of saying it is there is a hell of a lot of potential there, and we know about the potential, but really figuring out how that will look tangibly in the future it's going to be about really it's going to come to fruition as people really understand what difference the technology makes to their network, and also really understand and work with customers to understand what they want.
Thanks, guys. So I think we've got a good picture of the service side. I'm going to change tack a little bit on the questions. One interesting one that we got is a little bit more about the deployment approach. There's a question of measuring up the difference and the validity of going through the open stack versus the vendor-led approach to deploying NFV. So what do you think about that?
Well, I would sort of say that I don't think there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all response to that. If I can sort of refer back to the example I mentioned earlier on, which was SFR, primarily because it's fresh in my mind. SFR has used a lot of the big name vendors as part of its deployment. So there was a big sort of press release at the beginning of the year when, on the part of Cisco, which was talking about the full stack Cisco deployment that was involved. But the reality is a little bit more complex. It was in fact quite a multi-vendor deployment. There were lots of sort of mix and match of components. It wasn't a whole evolved packet core that was virtualized. It was just primarily the data forwarding parts of it. And I think in a sense, if NFV is about anything, it's also about empowering the operators to put them in a much more powerful position to determine the specific functions that they want to virtualize and the specific services that they're wanting to support, to get away from vendor lock-in, and to have the freedom not to go down the single vendor full stack deployment route. I think that's a really important thing because that's about delivering those cost efficiencies and those operational efficiencies. I know that's perhaps not necessarily a very welcome sort of opinion to an audience where there may be lots of vendors present, but obviously everybody knows that that's what operators are aspiring to achieve from NFV. I guess what vendors would have to do in response to that in terms of marketing and working with operators is to basically be willing to adapt their own platforms to be more supportive of the multi-vendor and the open source aspirations of their operator partners, and to try and prove that they can deliver the efficiency gains that that operators are seeking.
Yeah, and on that last point, I think we have seen some vendors purporting to be, trying to work down that route, that more open route, if you like. But it still remains to be seen, I think, just how practical that'll be in the long run, and just how that will work. But I think, some vendors, I think, are open to that way of thinking and understand the need to play well with others, if you like.
All right, guys, I think that we have time for one final question before we wrap up. This one is a slightly easier one, but I think will be important for everybody. We've gone through how many deployments there are in Europe and in North America. What about the rest of the world?
Right, well, that's a work in progress in terms of my research efforts. I'm doing the tracker. I mean, there's a lot going on, obviously, and obviously it's a big sort of gaping gap in our coverage at the moment that we haven't got a comprehensive database published on Asia Pacific yet, but that's coming down the line for March. Obviously, there's been a lot of innovation going on there. We've included NTT, we've got the likes of China Mobile Innovator. So it's a hugely interesting and challenging market. There's a lot going on at all of those sort of levels that we've just said. So for instance, the China Mobile stuff around the OpenO orchestrator framework that's now been merged into ONAP. That's really very much at the forefront, so that's more around the organizational transformation and the holistic transformation side of things, but also a lot about service innovation. So you've got the Telstra, the NTT, very much focused on WAN services. So basically, I think maybe the volume of deployments is probably shaping up to be about the same, but there's a lot of innovation and a lot that's interesting there. So all I can say there is watch this space.
All right, well, with that, we will conclude for today. Thank you so much, Matt and David, for this very interesting discussion. There are a few more questions that we didn't get to, so we'll try and get back to the rest of you directly after the webinar. And we will also send everybody a copy of the recording and the slides. So wait for those over the next few days. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and have a great day.